Welcome to the Mama Time podcast, where we dive into all things wellness to support and empower you on your journey through pregnancy and motherhood. I'm Charlotte, your host, a proud mama of 3 and a pre- and postnatal yoga teacher. My mission is simple, to help mothers like you feel your best. In this podcast, I'll share practical tools, heartfelt stories, and nurturing practices to help you reconnect with yourself through the ever-changing seasons of motherhood. Because while you're busy caring for everyone else, I'm here to remind you of something so important. You matter too. You are worthy of prioritizing your well-being, and when you do, it creates a ripple effect that transforms not just your life, but the lives of those around you. Along with sharing my own experiences and resources, I'll be chatting with inspiring fellow mamas who are passionate about supporting other women. Together, we'll have honest, heart-centered conversations about their journeys and the transformative tools they rely on to thrive in motherhood so you can thrive too. So take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's get into today's episode. Are you ready? Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Mama Time. I'm so glad to have you with me here today. We're going to have a solo episode today, and I actually had a completely different episode planned, and you're going to get that in a couple weeks. But because we've just had a really interesting time and are still going through it here where I live on the east coast of Australia, I wanted to focus on that. I wanted to talk about what's impacting the community, what's come up for me in that. So to give you some context, we've just had a tropical cyclone Alfred come through over the weekend. It is now Tuesday. The sun is finally out and things are definitely still not back to normal, but now we can start getting there. And it's just been a really interesting time, like I said, for me personally, for the community. So that's what I want to speak about today. But even if you're not in this area of the world, there's so many beautiful lessons that can be applied, not just to weather events, but anything that is making you feel maybe a little bit anxious or overwhelmed. And then also inconveniences, and how to really shift your mindset around that to have a much more expansive and really positive and appreciative outlook around things that can easily get us down if we're not really conscious about, where we're letting our thoughts take us. So that's sort of what this episode is going to look like. So let's get into it. I want to start off by just telling you kind of how I've been in this cyclone, because I wouldn't normally describe myself as someone who gets stressed easily. It can happen, and I can lean towards, anxious thoughts and getting a bit overwhelmed. But normally, especially with external things that I can't control, I kind of just accept it for what it is. But for some reason, this cyclone, as soon as I saw it kind of being spoken about, that it might be coming this way, I just felt really anxious in it. That could have been because about it. And that could have been because where I was at in my cycle, things like that, I definitely think played a role. But there was just a lot of panic around it, I think, because we don't normally get cyclones this far south. So I just didn't feel like our area was very prepared for it. But then I was just worried about what was going to happen, with all the trees and stuff around us. If they weren't used to the kinds of winds that were being predicted, what's going to happen. We have some really big, tall trees around our house, and that was making me really, really worried about, okay, what would happen if those trees came down, and just kind of playing all those factors. That was probably, I had the biggest sense of me being worried. And then just making sure we had enough, like they were saying that the power would most likely go out, and to be prepared for it to not go back for a few days. Or longer, actually, for even up to a week. And we had that experience, not this past Christmas, but the one before. We had some really big unexpected storms come through on Christmas evening, and we were out of power for 3 days. We had a lot of water damage to our house, which took I mean, almost 9 months to get fixed. The house was livable. It's not like we had to be out of our house, but some of the rooms, the carpet was up, and, mold mitigation. And there was just a lot going on. Took up a lot of last year for us. So yeah, I guess there was a little bit of like concern. Okay, we've just got our house fixed. Are we going to be going into all of that again? And thankfully, that was not the case. We actually, I'll get to, how it ended up for us, but, so that is where my anxious thoughts were coming from. And something that happens for me when I am really in a stressed state, I actually find it really difficult to come back to my practices regularly like I normally do. Like I'm really making the time for my morning practices. I shared a little bit about this on Instagram and shared a really easy practice that you can come back to if you're experiencing something similar. But because I was getting a little bit obsessive actually over this storm and just sort of tracking it, looking at all the different insights, like even getting into like people's comments about, how they were preparing and, what should I have in my emergency kit, and really going down rabbit holes to like make sure I was prepared. And so then, I was staying up late to do that, trying to get everything organized. And then, so I wasn't waking up as early, wasn't getting my morning practices in, just feeling a bit rushed. So all of that was just contributing to these anxious feelings. And it was really interesting. Last week, I had a podcast interview recording for this show with someone who I'm just so excited to have on the podcast. It was such a beautiful conversation. So her name is Anna Davis. She is a writer and a yoga teacher, trainer, all about female yoga. We'll obviously get way more into that when that episode comes out in a couple of weeks. So I can't wait for you to listen. And I've been a student of hers. She's someone I really look up to. And she was telling me how she was sort of adjusting her own practices for, settling into what's about to happen where we live. Because this was leading up to this cyclone. And when it was incoming, we were all sort of in preparation stage then. And how she was shifting her practices to be a bit more grounding. And that was just that reminder for me that is absolutely what I need to be leaning on as well. I can't just let my practices go at this time, because I'm actually making this so much worse for myself by not sticking to those. But sort of how I adapted that is I actually just did a very small, simple practice. So I just went into child's pose, extended child's pose. So big toes together, knees nice and wide apart, hips back to heels, and then releasing the chest and the forehead down onto the mat and extending the arms towards the top of the mat. If you want to, just jump into that right now, it's always a goodie. But that is a beautiful, nourishing, grounding, restorative pose. And then I just did 10 deep breaths there. So just allowing my energy to ground, allowing myself to come back to my breath, really focusing on my breath, feeling it rise and fall for those 10 breaths. And I think having something like that is very achievable and sort of was able to meet me where I was at, because I didn't feel like I had the time, or I guess really the attention, to do a longer practice, but that felt achievable. And then actually once I did that, I was like, okay, I can actually let all of that worrying, all of that Googling go for just a little bit longer. And I can just be in my body, be in my breath, continue to ground my energy, say a little prayer, have a meditation, and just feel a lot more connected to myself, to what I consider spirit around me, for guidance and support as well. And I just felt so much better from that place by only taking a couple minutes, not trying to do what I usually do and have a bit of a longer practice, but really scaling it back and meeting myself where I was at. And I think that's really important to do, because we can have things that throw us off. like this. And it can get really hard just to do, even what you normally do, let alone that extra support that you probably need in those times. So just having a much more simplified practice to go into that is going to have a really positive impact for you. And then if you feel like doing more, great. And if you don't, that's okay too. But at least you got something in to support yourself. So that's how I adjusted that. And then from there, I was really able to be in a lot more clear of a mind around, just coming back to things that I already know, right? Once I was prepared as best as I could, and I had the information that I needed, that's kind of all I could do. I had to really let go at that point. Anything else wasn't going to be up to me. I had my plan in place. I knew where we were all going to sleep during the night when, those winds were really coming through. So had a tree fallen, we were going to be in the safest places possible in the house. We had our emergency kit packed. We were ready if the power was going to go out. We had everything in place. So I had to stop obsessing at that point. And I really just had to let go of what was out of my control, trust that I had done my best with what was in my control, and then just find that balance of staying informed without obsessing, which can be very hard to do if you're someone who leans towards that, kind of behavior that I was having initially, trying to track every moment and, be all up to date in what I thought was the best way, but really was just making me spiral even more. But coming back to that balance and just, letting go of what was out of my control, because I can't control what's going to happen, right? And that can be really hard. I didn't have that experience until I was a mom. And I think anything where I feel like my children could be impacted and really, hurt, like was obviously what I was worried about in this case. I just want to be doing everything I possibly can to prevent anything from harming them, right? I'm sure a lot of moms can relate to this, or pretty much every mom. But I just had to trust that I had done what I could and know that the outcome was going to be what it was going to be, but we were going to be as prepared and as safe as possible and follow any guidelines and, evacuations, things like that as they changed. It did not get to the point where we were even advised to evacuate. We're not in a flood area. By the time it got to us, I think it was only a category 1. It had dropped down from a category 2. And look, there were some heavy winds. There were a lot of trees that came down around us, and not even really on our street, but the streets around us for sure. And we were only out of our power for less than 24 hours, which was incredibly lucky, to be honest. I almost feel guilty saying that because so many people are still without power. They're going on day 5, day 6. And that really takes a toll. I absolutely understand how difficult that can be, especially when you have children, you're trying to keep them entertained. All of that can be such a challenge. And that's kind of what I want to talk about now is those inconveniences that happen in a situation like this. We have things that we normally just don't even think twice about, that we take for granted, like our electricity, like our phone connection, our internet. That is still, the connections here at the moment are still pretty hit and miss. Like in our house, I'm recording this differently today. That's why you've got no video, because the connection just isn't there. So I'm having to record this without internet and then find somewhere to upload it later that does have internet connection. But things like that we take for granted. Even just going to the grocery store at the moment, because a lot of the grocery stores have been out of power and some of them still are. Getting fresh things or even like frozen or cold things is really, really difficult at the moment as well. There's a lot of grocery stores that are still closed. I went to 3 this morning and finally the last one was open and I was able to get a few things I needed. Not able to get some of them, but you just get what you can and you make do with what you have. People are over it at this point. And I get, especially if you've been out of power for about 6 days, it is really difficult to stay in a positive headspace. But it's also when it's most important. You're allowed to be frustrated. I'm not saying that anyone shouldn't be frustrated. And what I'm definitely not talking about is people that have had absolutely devastating destructions, whose homes have been destroyed, who, have issues with flooding in their home and things like that. I'm not talking about that. That is not inconvenience. I am talking about the inconveniences of the things that, we normally take for granted. Like I said, like our electricity, like the internet, and things like that. So while it is very inconvenient, it's also, I believe, there are so many lessons in that. And there's, probably things that we need from that. So I want to flip the script in that. And one sort of spiritual lesson that I learned when taking my yoga teacher training that they really honed in on, that I wish someone had told me this at a much younger age, because I probably heard it at the time I needed to hear it and would actually listen to it. Maybe I'd heard it prior to that and it just sort of, rolled off my back because it wasn't something I was able to resonate with then. But it's this idea that life happens for you. Life doesn't happen to you. Life happens for you. And when you look at life from that angle and you have that mindset, you are out of that sort of victim pessimistic state of just getting stuck in the rubbish of, oh, well, it's so annoying because blah, 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 and they don't have this. And why did all these people, buy all those things? Now I don't have anything. And you're just like stuck in that victim cycle that doesn't feel good to be in. And look, we all get stuck there sometimes, but when you have a practice of being able to catch yourself about that and pull yourself out and say, okay, yes, this is frustrating. This is annoying. Would I have chosen this? Probably not. But are there lessons that I need from this? Absolutely. So one eye-opening thing to me has been with my kids, especially my youngest, my 5-year-old and 14-year-old. They're old enough to have a conversation about look, guys, the internet's not working. So we can't just watch what we want to watch on TV. Normally we do a lot of Netflix and things like that, where it's oh, what do you want to watch? I can put that on right away. And they don't really know a world beyond that, which is so crazy to me. My 2-year-old, however, does not understand that and has not been having it. And he has asked me to put on these shows that he likes so many times. And I'm like, buddy, we've got to watch what's on the kids' channels on, that's on the TV. Mommy can't change that. That's what's on. And he doesn't understand that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my fault. He doesn't understand that because I have allowed him to just be in this uber convenient world where he thinks he can watch whatever he wants at the drop of a hat, because that's how it's been. This is actually as frustrating as it is for me to have to deal with his own frustration around that. This is actually exactly what he needs and exactly what I need, because it's very eye-opening to realize, that just he doesn't even know that sometimes you can't watch exactly what you want to watch. And look, we haven't just been doing screen time. We've been playing a lot of games and things like that. But when we are, having those periods of screen time, he is just, not understanding that he can't watch whatever he wants exactly in that moment. Even watching them, have to sit through commercials and stuff like that. They're just not used to that. And it's actually very funny and so good for them. And even, the day that we didn't have power, even better for them. If I look at some of the good things from that, I was laying in bed and the kids, reading. The kids were doing puzzles or drawing or, one of the many activities we had going on that day. And I was just like, oh my gosh, it is so quiet. I can't hear anyone's shows, anyone's games. It is just so peaceful and quiet. And that was such a beautiful realization that we just needed to disconnect. And honestly, we probably could have used it a little bit longer, but I'm glad our power came back on because it saved all our food and everything. But and then not having the internet after that, I think has been definitely a blessing for our family. The other thing has been, school was out Thursday, Friday, and then again on Monday. So, one thing I could have focused on was being frustrated because I needed work. I needed to be able to work those days, as did most people, and, get things done, right? But that's hard to do when all the kids are home and, you don't have connections or anything like that. And I could have focused on that and been stuck in that frustration. But I actually really enjoyed just the slowness, not having to get up and rush anywhere, not having to get people to where they needed to be at a certain time, and just being in that slowness and all being together. Like, we had such beautiful family time together. Like, it was actually so nice. Don't get me wrong, there were definitely times where I was like, okay, I don't know how to entertain these kids anymore. We did go to a play center the past 2 days that was absolute insanity, because everyone had the same idea once they could get out. There were only a few places open. So, we had to wait, one in, one out, because they were at capacity. And I invited some friends to come, but I didn't have any cell reception. So I'm like, I don't even know who's got this message. I don't know if we'll see anyone, whatever. We'll have a good time either way. There was one person working behind the counter at the cafe. This poor woman, she was doing such a great job. So we had to wait a really long time for a coffee and some food. And you end up talking to people next to you too, as well, because everyone's waiting in lines for things. There's no internet. People aren't hunched over looking at their phone because that's just our default mechanism. People are talking to each other and checking in on each other and, how are you doing? Like, do you guys have power? Do you need anything? Like, it was actually really beautiful. And I think even in really devastating times, you can always look at things like that. There's always a way to see the good in people, because there's so much goodness in the world and people want to help out their neighbors. And when you get to witness that, even though it can be in devastating times, like we've seen with floods, with damages and things like that, it is so beautiful to witness that and be reminded of that. And I do think it's contagious when you see other people helping that way. It can inspire you to do the same and to pay it forward. And yeah, so I think if I can sum this up in a little bit more succinct way, if we catch ourselves, because of course it's easy to get into that negative place when we do have these inconveniences because we're not used to them. And there are things that suck about it, absolutely. But that's okay. Those are the things that help us grow. If we catch ourselves when we have those, negative thoughts, and we can say, okay, yep, this does suck in some ways, but what's good about this? What are the positives? And you maybe take a moment just to try to find a couple of things, maybe try to pick out 3 things that, although the annoying things are still there, there's also these great things too. And if you can look for those things, even just a couple of them, you are going to, 1, feel better. And 2, you're going to train your brain to look for the positive. You're going to help your kids do the same, to see those lessons and come back to that belief that everything happens for you, not to you, but for you. And I promise, when you live your life that way, the faith and the trust that you have about the things that are happening will give you so much peace and so much faith. And it's really the biggest mindset shift that I've had in my entire life. So put that on your wall somewhere, because it's a really powerful shift that you can make. Actually, the last thing I want to touch on with this is that I have heard in some other accounts that the sort of spiritual meaning of a cyclone like this is a big energy buildup and then release and clearing. So it's clearing the path. It's getting rid of what no longer needs to be here for us. There's been a big buildup of things that maybe we needed to let go of personally, or that collectively we needed to let go of, and a huge path clearing and cleansing so that we can sort of come into that, to where we need to go, how we need to be in this next chapter post cyclone. So I think that ties in really nicely to the, that mindset of life happens for me. Again, you can look at that from this whole cyclone perspective as well, which I find really interesting. So that is where we're at with this cyclone. I will try to get this podcast uploaded very soon, so that it can come out on its normal Wednesday. I've got to find some place where I've got internet to do that. But I will try to do that. And for everyone that is experiencing, difficulties with this, if you have been out of power for a long time, if your house has been damaged, even if you were just like me and just feeling a little bit anxious around it all, I'm sending my thoughts and prayers to you. I'll see you all next week. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope you found inspiration and empowerment in this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd be so grateful if you could share it with another mom who could use a little extra support or encouragement. By sharing, you're helping us build a community of strong, empowered mamas who are thriving in motherhood together. If you have a moment, please leave a quick review and rating. It really helps more moms like you find the show and feel supported on their journey. For more simple and transformative practices, come connect with me on Instagram at mama_time_yoga. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to hit follow so you never miss an episode. And until next time, take care of yourself, mama. You've got this.